All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this panel on the newly passed legislation SB4, which makes housing on church and nonprofit college campuses an option, a by right option, so that we, no longer have to beg at City Council for permission to build more housing. And that is always a good thing. So I'm really excited to introduce to you our two panelists, Madi Manji from Inner City Law Center, who was the bill sponsor, one of a couple of partner bill sponsors on this piece of legislation, and also Alexa Washburn from the nonprofit affordable housing developer National Community Renaissance, or National Core, which has a long history of building affordable housing on church land, institutional knowledge, and recent experience from Orange County that we are really excited to share with you today. I am looking at this as continuing to plant the seeds of what is possible. We've done two other webinars about housing on church land, which you can find on our YouTube channel. I called them YIGBY Part 1 and 2, and I will probably end up billing this one as YIGBY Part 3, Yes in God's Backyard. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mati, who is going to start us off with an overview of the bill. Mati, take it away. Go ahead. I will stop sharing my screen so that you can start.
Sorry, muted for a second. Hi everyone, my name is Matthew Menji. I'm the Director of Public Policy for Inner City Law Center, and we were really proud to co-sponsor Senate Bill 4 along with our partners at SCAM, the Southern California Association of Nonprofit Housing Developers, and NPH, Northern California Association of Nonprofit Housing Developers, and with the Southern California and Northern California Council of Carpenters. And so really excited to talk today a little bit about Senate Bill 4 and some of the stuff it does. Let's see if I can share screen here. Okay, this here. And let's see. So let's see this.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Well, let's jump right in then. You know, we're all very familiar with the problem we're trying to solve here. We have a massive shortage of housing. It has resulted in a massive homelessness crisis, a massive housing affordability crisis, resulting in inability of folks to access homes, inability to it's causing problems to the economy. And Inner City Law Center, and I would say most folks in the housing sector believe, in the affordable housing sector believe, that we need to significantly increase production of affordable housing if we want to seriously address homelessness. We really want to tackle the various housing problems that we're facing in our state. So we know that the two biggest barriers for the production of affordable housing are funding and land use restrictions that prohibit residential density adequate for affordable housing development. Senate Bill 4 does not address the funding piece, which arguably is the biggest piece, but it does tackle the second problem, which is land use restrictions that make it very difficult to build affordable housing. So Senate Bill 4, what does it do? It creates a streamlined process for religious organizations and nonprofit colleges and universities to develop affordable housing on their property, regardless of local zoning restrictions. There's a lot of limitations to that, and I'll be going through them. But that's the broad aspect. If it is found that a property that after going through all the restrictions, and add one caveat there, that a project does not comply with objective standards, localities have to respond within 60 days for projects that are less than 150 units, and within 90 days for projects that are above 150 units. So really creates a strict timeline for localities to respond. Another important aspect here is all projects are subject to density bonus law. And so all the waivers that you can get in density bonus law, you'd be able to get under Senate Bill 4 with the limitations that I will note. So Senate Bill 4 applies to projects that are 100% affordable at 80% AMI to low-income households. There is a possibility, if a developer would like to set aside 20% for moderate income households. That's 100% AMI. And then 5% of the units may be set aside for staff of the religious organization or the nonprofit college or university. The project requires a minimum of 1 off-street parking spaces per unit, unless it's an AB 1401 zone, so within half mile of transit. Also, if it's within 1 block of a car share, this 1 off-street parking requirement doesn't apply. So that's really interesting. I think that's the expansion. Projects sort of have to be a partnership between the landowner and nonprofit housing builder. The specific specification in the law is that the land must be owned by a applicable religious organization or nonprofit college or university before January 1st, 2024. It doesn't specify whether the sort of nonprofit college or university can sell the land to the affordable housing developer, lease the land to the developer, rent it. Those are open to the negotiations between nonprofits, college, universities, nonprofits, religious organizations, and the affordable housing developer that built the project. So those are all subject to negotiation, and they're not specified in the bill. The only specification is that the land must be owned by the qualified organization before January 1st, 2024. And if that is the case, they can work with any applicable affordable housing developer that's willing to work with them to develop the project. And then, of course, lastly, all projects must be approved ministerially. So these are by right processes, they're not subject to CEQA, and there are strict timelines that localities must respond to if they deem the project to not meet objective standards. These projects only apply in urban areas. They don't apply in prime farmland or fire. The fire hazard severity zone. Sorry, that's slightly complicated and changed. Please disregard that paragraph. There were last minute changes to the bill that I actually need to confirm where it applies on that particular area. The development can't be located on sites that would require the demolition of affordable housing or rent-controlled housing or tenant occupied housing within the past 10 years. So that's SB 30 protections. Development can't be adjoined to any site where more than 1/3 of the square footage on the site is dedicated to light industrial use. And if the housing development project requires the demolition of any existing residential units, the SB 230 would apply. And then lastly, the localities may impose objective planning standards with documentation, but they do have to respond within 60 days for development with less than 150 units or within 90 days for projects that are more than 50 units. This is some of the latest additions that we had to make to the bill, where every project does have to conduct a phase 1 environmental assessment. If any mitigations are needed based on the findings of the phase 1 environmental assessment, a phase 2 environmental assessment, it may be required. So that was something that we had to do towards the end. Another thing we had to add was for development is within 500 feet of a freeway. Its project still allowed, but the projects have to have internal air filtration system up to MERV 13. So that's a high level of air filtration to mitigate any pollution from the freeways. And this is very important. Every project must meet labor standards required in the AB 2011. So these are paying prevailing wages. And if it's projects that are more than 50 units, prevailing wages plus healthcare is required. And in addition, some efforts must be required to seek apprenticeship. So this is not a skilled and trained, it is prevailing wage, but there is written into law that efforts must be made to seek contractors who use apprentices. And there's a recognition that if those apprenticeships are not found, then the developer can move forward with a developer that is working or with contractors that pay prevailing wage, and with projects about 50 units, prevailing wage plus healthcare. In terms of the allowable density of the developments, if it's located in sort of these are based on the Mullen densities. These are all based on the Mullen density. Folks are familiar with it. So it's 15 units per acre for an incorporated city within non-metropolitan county. These are if it's in a residential area. For an unincorporated area, it's 10 units per acre. For suburban jurisdiction, 20 units per acre, and for a jurisdiction in the metropolitan county, 30 units per acre. So really, for most cities, this would be around 30 units per acre. So not the highest level of density, not the lowest level of density, it's a moderate level of density. Good thing is if the project is located in a zone that doesn't allow residential use, it actually has a higher allowable density of 40 units per acre, plus 1 story above the maximum height. So this is something that so for areas that are not zoned for residential uses, it can allow for a higher density. So locality allows for again greater residential density than that applies. So it wouldn't be limited to this level. If there's a higher density allowable by the locality, then the higher density or building limit would apply. So all after this but all the land that could be used for development has to be owned by an independent institution of higher education or a religious institution on or before January 1st, 2024. That's how it's currently written in the bill. So, you know, there's still, I guess, a couple more months and 15 days for an institution to acquire this land, but after that, this window will be closed. It says it's for, but there's some changes. If it's within the property that is to be developed can't be adjoined to any site that's more than 1/3 light industrial. It also can't. It also can't be within 1,200 feet of a site that is heavy industrial, and then it can't be located 1,600 feet from a site that is currently a Title V industrial use. Title V industrial uses are relatively high. They're classified as sites that have high levels of nuisance and whatnot. Tend to be like incinerators, garbage dumps. They're not the most common in the world, but they do exist. I have a link here, sort of sites that are required to get a Title V operating permit. And so no site can be located 1,600 feet within one of these sites.
Hey, Marty.
Yeah.
We had a quick we had a request. A lot of this information is kind of highly technical and probably new to some of our audience members. So we just had a request. If you could just slow down a little bit.
Oh,
and you're
apologies.
No problem. Thank you so much.
And I'm going through this, but I'm going to make sure to answer any question. We can go back to any of the slides.
Yes, if you have questions. Sorry, if anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll have time for Q&A at the end.
I'll go over this again. So it's somewhat tiered. Can be adjoined to any site. It can be adjoined to any site that is industrial, and that's defined as a site that's more than 1/3 industrial. Can't be 1,200. Can't be within 1,200 feet of a site that is heavy industrial. It can't be 1,600 feet from a site that is a Title V site, and then it can't be within 3,200 feet of an existing facility that extracts natural gas or refined oil. This is an existing active facility. So if the previously active facility that is currently dormant, this restriction does not apply. CalEMB has some great maps. I'll see if I can share this towards the end about sort of what sites are excluded. This is probably the biggest exclusion, especially in the LA County area. We have a lot of oil wells along the coast in Orange County, in Huntington Beach, in Yorba Linda, Brea, and then in the Inglewood Basin area, including Inglewood, South Bay, Torrance. So this is probably the biggest restriction in here. And it does limit many sites that are on residential and non-residential areas. Let me check the chat real quick. If you can pause between that would be great. Yes, I will pause. Maria, did you have a question?
Oh, thank you. No, I was saying pausing in between your points allows us for us to take it in better. Thank you.
Apologies. I have a tendency to talk fast, so I will do that.
Thank you so much.
Does anybody have? I'm just going to ask. I'm going to stop here. Does anybody here? Would anybody like me to go back a couple slides or review any material?
Yes, I would be grateful if you'd back up a few slides and then just let us look one more time, because that was a lot of information about the restrictions.
Okay. So these are about the density, the maximum allowable density on non-residential sites is 40 units per acre, plus one height of 1 story above the maximum otherwise. In residential areas, Mullen densities apply. So that's 15 units per acre in basically all of Orange County would fall under 30 units per acre. And if there's any folks that are, and then going back to the labor standards. So
We had
prevailing
We had a question about the high fire, the WUI, I think, wildland urban interface, the high fire zone.
if it's okay, I'm gonna double check on that. I know there was a change, so after Alexa goes, I'm gonna check that real quick, and I'll answer that question towards the end of the call, if that's okay.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. And perhaps we could make these slides available in the updated form, and we could send it out to everyone who registered.
Definitely, I will make sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay, so just go back slightly. Yeah, I'm just gonna go back here a little bit more, cover this one more time, and then I'll move forward and I'll try to go a little bit slower. Apologies. Very quick. So again, these are applicable in urban areas. I'm gonna go back after Alexa and double check the high fire, the very high fire severity zones. And again, SB 230 protection apply. And all projects must conduct the phase 1 environmental assessment. And if they're located within 500 feet of a freeway, they're still allowable, but the internal areas of the project would require a MERV 13 filter.
And Madi, question, you might be covering this, I might be jumping ahead, but projects are also still required to go through tribal consultation, correct?
So I think if something is found in the phase 1 environmental review that needs to be mitigated in terms of tribal resources, then they would.
Okay.
But otherwise they may not have to. So really it's only if something is found that needs to be mitigated. Okay. So going back here, land has to be owned by institutions, religious organizations, or churches, universities before January 1st, 2024. And then there's the rubric of depending on the type of industrial site, there's various zones of ranging from 1,200 feet, 1,500 feet, and 3,200 feet, the highest for active natural gas and oil drilling facilities or refining facilities. That's mostly the technical aspect of the bill. These are sponsors, NPH SCAM, Carpenters, Inner City Law Center, JPAC, the Jewish Public Affairs Committee of California, and supported also by many nonprofit organizations, indie organizations. We're happy that we're able to get this law through, and that's pretty much the technical aspects of the bill. But I'm going to open to any questions.
Well, I'll just address a couple of questions I saw. One was to explain what CEQA stands for, CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, which has been both a blessing in helping us preserve our environment, but has also been very challenging when it comes to getting housing built, because a lot of times opponents of new development will use that to slow down and or kill the project. So that's where CEQA comes from, and that's why having a project be quote unquote by right basically means that it's the local government no longer has the ability to just say no out of hand. That it's almost as though the state is saying, okay, this project now complies with your zoning, and it's no longer what's called a discretionary action, meaning the city council has to basically bless your ability to build it. And so another reason that is very helpful is because we hear a lot from local elected officials who know that we need know that we need more housing in our communities, perhaps are even inclined that way themselves, but it's very challenging when they're faced with a lot of opposition from their constituents. And so having a project be by right kind of takes that question out. It's not if this housing is going to happen, it's that it's going to happen, and how can I as an elected official help shape that project so that it's a good fit for my community. So it sort of helps us over that hurdle of production, and helping us get to yes, and shaping a project to fit a community rather than just saying, no, this project can't happen in this community.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
also add that because of density bonus law and because of the maximum density requirements in this bill, what this means is if you build a project that is sort of at the applicable density, you can, and because these are 100% affordable projects, you can sort of combine this with density bonus law and request for as many waivers that are allowable under density bonus law to objective standards to make the project allowable as long as they fall under the appropriate densities. So that does allow for a flexible, a degree of flexibility when putting a project together.
And Monty, are these projects exempted from CEQA?
They are exempt from CEQA, but they do have to do a phase one environmental review.
They do have to do
Yeah.
a phase one environmental review.
They're just considered not a project under CEQA.
That's it.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Which
that's
has its
it.
own technical
Right.
meaning. Yeah, I know, right.
That
Um,
clarification. Technically, yeah, it's not technically creating exemption if CEQA, so defining it as not a project, so then it's not like that, so it's not subject to CEQA. And so that's the same as 2011. It's not creating. Technically, it's not an exemption of CEQA. It is a defining it as not a project.
Not a project. Okay. I think our friend Betsy has a question. Betsy, go ahead.
To unmute myself. Okay, thanks. In the material you provided, I got confused about there were things that can be done with units with buildings that are 50 units or more, and things that can't. In particular, I think you said that if it's in a residential area, it can only be 40 units. Is that right?
No, so I'm going to go back to that. That's referring to the density per acre.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's see if I can go back to those slides. There you go. So this is referring to the density per acre, not the unit limit.
Okay.
Yeah.
So say more.
So density per acre is kind of like a metric that's used to, usually it's like when we're defining density. So if you
Right.
have let's say half an acre, when you say density per acre of 30 units, that means that you can build up to 15 units on that parcel. And so this is basically overriding local zoning and creating
Okay.
this. So essentially it's like zoning at the statewide level.
So there was a break though between 40 units. I wrote down 40 units, one story if in a residential area. So there it is.
Yeah. So the 30 unit limit applies to, I would say, nearly every part of Orange County in residential zone.
Right.
The 40 unit per acre applies in non-residential zone. So this is a plot that's owned by a religious organization or a nonprofit college university. It might be zoned commercial.
Okay.
So even if residential use is not allowed under zoning, SB4 does two things. First, it says residential use is now allowed, and the maximum density is now 40 units per acre.
Got it. Thank you very much. And then is prevailing wage required in all cases or only in cases of 50 units or more?
Prevailing wages are required in all cases.
Okay.
For projects that are under
And it's health, so it's prevailing wage and healthcare for 50 units or more?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And then we have a question from David who's asking about the density of 40 units per acre. Is that the base density? I think he's referring to like before the density bonus.
I don't know the answer to the question, but Alexa is nodding. You want to take?
Yeah, yes. So it allows 40 dwelling units per acre. That's in the non-residential zones, and you can utilize density bonus on top of that.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
So then in a residential zone with a 30 dwelling unit per acre, you can use density bonus on top of that too.
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. All right. I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and let Alexa get started. I'm running slides for her, so let me go to those slides. Yes, no problem.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name's Alexa Washburn. I am Senior Vice President of Planning and Acquisitions for National Community Renaissance, and most people know us as National Core, or Core for short. And I appreciate the opportunity to join the conversation today. As Elizabeth said, we've been partnering with churches to provide affordable housing, I'd say probably for about 8 years now. I think, some of the projects I'm going to highlight go back to 2017. And so we are very, very excited that Senate Bill 4 passed. But I look at it as Senate Bill 4 is another tool, right, that we have in our toolbox. And I always say, like your toolbox, you don't use every tool on every single project. And so, not every site's going to qualify for Senate Bill 4. And we're not necessarily going to use Senate Bill 4 on every church projects because there's a number of considerations that we need to weigh. So what I want to do this afternoon is share a couple of projects with you that are either completed or under construction. And so so Senate Bill 4 was not in place at the time. And so these are case studies that allow me to look back, right? We can look back on them and say, how would have Senate Bill 4 helped us with these projects? What are some considerations for use of Senate Bill 4? And then hopefully I can inspire the folks that are joining us today on what is possible on church land and on college land as well. So next slide, please. So I always have to do a little plug, but also give you some context as to National Core. We are a nonprofit community development organization. And we specialize in building and managing high quality, affordable housing paired with best practice supportive services. And we've been doing this for over 30 years. And we own and operate over 10,000 units of affordable housing, and 8,500 of those are right here in Southern California. I think what makes us unique is we're in-house, fully integrated. So we not only develop, we build and we manage, and then we also provide services at each of our properties. So next slide. So for National Core and our church partners, there are a number of benefits that we see to our partnership. And first and foremost, our partnership has created an opportunity for everyone to further our shared mission, right? We have a common goal of serving others and helping our most vulnerable populations, from our frail seniors to our families to transitional age youth and the homeless. And so having that shared mission really helps advance our partnership and makes it a nice fit to do affordable housing on church land. I think it also creates an opportunity for affordable housing developments to serve as a catalyst, right? A catalyst to revitalize or underutilized land. And, we're investing millions of dollars into these affordable housing developments, sometimes, additional infrastructure upgrades, depending on the funding sources that we're bringing into the deal. It could be also parks and transit amenities as well. So this creates an opportunity to uplift an entire neighborhood. Thirdly, churches, many of them are located in stable residential neighborhoods that qualify as high resource. And high resource is a priority area for certain funding sources in California and through our low-income housing tax credit program. And then also we can structure the transaction to meet the needs of both parties. So if the church's long-term goal is they need a long-term revenue stream, we will often enter into a long-term ground lease, right? And they receive the annual rent payments, and that they can use that towards maintenance or upgrades or operations of their church. There's other churches that may just need a one-time payment, some upfront cash. And so we'll acquire the land, and maybe there's a balloon payment. So, each transaction is unique, and it gives us the ability to structure that transaction to meet our goals as well as our church partners' goals. And I always say the affordable housing process, it's really sort of a puzzle. And thankfully for these projects, we've been able to figure out how to fit most of the pieces together. Next slide, please. So as I said, we've had several church partnership projects that recently completed in Orange County, as well as a few that are underway, and with various faiths and denominations, as you can see here. And I'd say, while each is unique, there are essentially two types of development. We have development where the church is going to continue to operate on the site, and we nestle those affordable housing buildings on site around the church or adjacent to the church. And we have other instances where the church will own excess land that's either vacant or there's buildings on it, but they're not going to continue to operate a church there. It just may be land that the church owns. So what I want to do is share our experience with two church partnership projects in Orange County, in the city of Placentia, as well as Buena Park. And both of these are partnership projects with the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles. So next slide, please. The first development I want to talk about is Santa Angelina. This is our senior apartment home community in the city of Placentia. And it's a partnership project between National Core and Blessed Sacrament Episcopal Church, and then the Episcopal Diocese of LA. And gosh, this project was initiated in 2017 when the diocese expressed interest in exploring the possibility of affordable housing on this local church site. And so the Blessed Sacrament Church, it's located at 1314 North Angelina Drive. This is at the northeast corner of the intersection of Angelina Drive and Morse Avenue. And if you guys are familiar with Northern Orange County, the major cross streets are Yorba Linda Boulevard and Kramer. And the entire church campus is about 3.9 acres, and it's one contiguous rectangular shaped parcel. The church is centrally located in the center of the site with a large surface parking lot located on the southern half fronting Morse. And then the church, they currently operate out of three buildings. There's the main sanctuary, there's a parish hall that's adjacent to the sanctuary, and then they operate a preschool that's in the back. And so the northern and southeastern portions of the church campus were undeveloped, underutilized. There was some landscaping with trees and I'd say grass that was mostly dead for a large part of the year, unless we got some rain. And, thinking about the various funding sources to utilize for affordable housing, we really liked this site because it was fairly walkable. A 77 walk score in North Orange County is actually pretty good. It means it's fairly walkable. It has good access to amenities, which are not only needed for our residents, but also to have a competitive application. So you see here the site context. It's across the street from retail and services, and then behind it, kind of nestled around it, is a single family residential neighborhood. All right, next slide, please. So we are currently developing a senior affordable community with 65 apartment homes. There's 58 one-bedroom units, 6 two-bedroom units, and 1 studio. And the density for this development is 16.7 dwelling units per acre. So keep in mind that Senate Bill 4 would allow 30 dwelling units per acre on this site. And while we are building a 2-story building, Senate Bill 4 would have allowed 3 stories and maybe additionally more if we were to utilize density bonus. You can see here that the church remains the center of the site. That was very important to the congregation, that the church still remained the focal point. And then we are currently constructing 2 buildings, one on either side, to really create an interconnected campus. And the residential development, it'll include a variety of amenities. We've got a community room that we will provide services for our seniors, community gardens, there's an outdoor fireplace area and seating areas. And so in order to build these apartment homes, we had to demolish the existing parish hall and reconstruct a new parish hall oriented in a different way, as well as a memorial courtyard for the church. Now I want to talk about parking a little bit. There were 85 existing parking spaces for the church. We're adding 45 spaces for the residential units. So there's going to be a total of 130 spaces. And the approved parking ratio for the residential units is 0.7 spaces per unit. So again, I want you to note that that parking is under the requirement of the minimum 1 space per unit for Senate Bill 4. Okay, and I'm going to talk a little bit later about parking. Next slide. So here's a view. This is a rendering of building 1 at the north end of the property, and it just shows how the new residential units are going to interface with the new church parish hall. Next slide. And this view shows building 2 that's at the southern end of the property facing the single family homes across Moore Street. And I want to draw your attention to the scale and the architecture of the buildings, because this was carefully designed to be complementary to the existing church. So you see that we carry over a lot of the architectural design elements and to be compatible with the single family neighborhood. And next slide. And as I said, Santa Angelina will consist of 64 affordable units for households that earn less than 60% of the area median income. And 21 of those units are set aside as permanent supportive housing. Okay, that's apartment homes for individuals that either are experiencing homelessness or are at risk of experiencing homelessness. And then there would be 1 exempt on-site manager's unit that's not income restricted. So we always have a manager that lives on-site in each of our communities. All right, next slide. So the second development that I want to highlight is called Orchard View Gardens Senior Apartment Home Community, and it's in the city of Buena Park. And this is a partnership project between National Core, St. Joseph's Episcopal Church, and the Episcopal Diocese of LA. And this project was initiated back in 2018. After we started work on the Santa Angelina development in Placentia, we had another church within the LA diocese that raised their hands and said, hey, we're interested in exploring affordable housing too. And so they connected us with them. Next slide. So this project's located at 8300 Valley View Boulevard. It's about mid-block along Valley View Street between La Palma and Crescent Avenue. And this is a 3.2 acre project site that is home to St. Joseph's Episcopal Church. You'll notice that the church is located on the southern portion of the site and housed in a single building, and it's surrounded by surface parking. And then the northern portion of the site is vacant. And that's where we're going to nestle our apartment home community. And so the project, we had to subdivide the existing parcel into 2 parcels. And the southern parcel would maintain the church and the surface parking on about 1.4 acres. And then that newly created parcel is about 1.76 acres. And that's going to be our parcel for the senior affordable apartment home community. And next slide. So the 66 we're proposing, or this is actually under construction now, is 66 apartment homes for our seniors age 62 and better. And it includes 62 1-bedroom units and 4 2-bedroom units. And it's proposed in 1 larger building, and then we have 3 smaller buildings. The density for this housing parcel is 37.5 dwelling units per acre. So we are would be exceeding the SB4 density that's allowed. That's that 30 dwelling units per acre. But again, remember with SB4, we're allowed to use density bonus as well. So in this case, that our density would be right in there. And here, building 1, we face Valley View Streets. It's a 2-story building that transitions to 3 stories internally and then back down to 2 stories. And then we have 9 little casitas along the property line that abuts the single family neighborhood. We also gave careful consideration to the character and scale of this project as well, to ensure that it was complementary to the surrounding properties and that the architecture and the massing blended in with the surrounding uses. And so here the maximum building height is 35 feet. 3 stories. Again, we placed that 3rd story interior to the site. And I want to bring up parking again, because this one, parking was a challenge. The church had 121 existing parking spaces on site. And in order to develop the housing, we had to remove 41 spaces. So we were reducing the church parking to 80 spaces, but then we were adding 48 spaces for the residential units. So it resulted in a very similar parking ratio to Santa Angelina, which was about 0.7 spaces per unit. Again, note that this is under the SB4 requirement. Next slide. There we go. So this is a view of building 1, and it shows how it looks in context with the existing church. Next slide. And this view, this shows the most dense part of the building, the 3 stories, and then how it drops to the single stories casitas that run along the north property line. Next slide. And again, Orchard View Gardens, it will consist of 65 units that are affordable to our seniors earning 60% of the area median income. We do have 8 of the apartment homes that are set aside as permanent supportive housing, PSH, and then again, there would be 1 exempt on-site manager's unit. All right, next slide. So now that I presented our 2 case studies, and when I look back at what the challenges were and how, if SB4 were in place at that time, how we could have benefited from this tool. So one of the challenges that we faced with both projects, I'd say, was the complexity of the entitlements and the number of applications required to get that development, both of those developments approved. So for both projects, we had to go through a general plan amendment, a zone change, development plan review. On Buena Park, we had a parcel map, a development agreement. And then for both projects, we had CEQA as well as NEPA because we had vouchers. And for CEQA, it was a mitigated negative declaration. So for these projects, we started the pre-application meetings, I would say in spring of 2018. And approval happened in 2020. Okay, so both of these projects took 2.5 to 3 years from our first submittal to get the project approved. So with SB4, if SB4 was in place at the time, I estimate we could have gotten through the entitlement process in about 6 to 9 months. So we could have shaved off 2 to 2.5 years from our entitlement process. Which would allowed us to deliver, units would have already been on the ground. We'd have residents moved in there, enjoying their new homes already. So right there just shows how Senate Bill 4 could have streamlined this process significantly. And next slide. Another challenge we face on church partnership projects is, in trying to navigate the entitlement process, the reality is that there's many different entities involved and they all have strong opinions or requirements that need to be met. You have the church as the landowner and the visionary, which for both of these projects, there was the diocese, then the local church leadership, and then the congregational members. Then you have city staff and the elected officials who need to ensure that the project meets city codes and the development objectives. And then you have neighbors who are ultimately feel they're going to be impacted in some way, right, by this new development that's occurring near their home. And then you have us, the developer, who's trying to navigate deadlines for funding sources, trying to please everybody while making sure that our budget doesn't implode, right? And so with Senate Bill 4, some of these challenges go away because the projects are ministerial, meaning that we wouldn't have to go to Planning Commission or City Council. But I do want to emphasize that you'd still need to do some level of outreach, right? You're still going to need to do outreach internally within the church to get the congregation supportive of the project and also your immediate neighbors. It's not, and I'm saying that this isn't required by Senate Bill 4, but this is how National Core, how we would still conduct our projects using Senate Bill 4. Next slide, please. Now, to highlight how these parties played out in Placentia, I wanted to share this slide with you because it shows only some of the outreach that was conducted for Santa Angelina. And you can see that some of these date back to 2018 when we first started meeting with the church vestry about concepts. And you can see there's numerous meetings on here with the city, and the diocese and the vestry and the community. And while, this slide really doesn't capture all of the meetings that occurred, I think it gives you a picture of how extensive the outreach process can be for these types of projects. And, ultimately, again, the project was approved in December of 2020. And so while Senate Bill 4 would relieve some of these meetings, right, in terms of the discretionary review process, I think for every project, you still need to do some level of community outreach. But again, the streamlining from a 3-year process to about 6 to 9 months is significant, a significant benefit of Senate Bill 4. Next slide, please. Along with the winding road of community meetings, right, we have this winding road of site plan iterations. So generally, each meeting that we had, there would be a series of meetings with our design team afterwards to adjust the site plan and the project plans. And so you can kind of see how the building started to move around the site and the building footprints evolved over time. And what I wanted to point out here is that we talked about, Senate Bill 4 defers back to what I call the housing element default densities, right? So for most of Orange County, that default density is 30 dwelling units per acre. And so what's interesting here is we got a lot of pushback in Placentia. Originally, our buildings, we proposed 3 stories. They ultimately ended up being 2 stories. We were able to maintain the original number of units that we proposed. So we had an incredible design team that was able to still design the project and drop to 2 stories. Now, again, if Senate Bill 4 were in place, we could have still pursued 3 stories, the original design, and gotten that approved through the city. Next slide. Okay, yeah, here's where I want to talk a little bit about parking, because, with every project, there's always concerns about traffic and parking. I think this is a concern for all stakeholders. You hear it from the city, from the neighbors, from the church, and then we even discuss it internally here at National Core between our development and our property management. And so we've put together extensive materials on parking and parking studies, and we even conduct our own internal parking studies. And so I think Senate Bill 4, it is going to help with some parking challenges. But in our case, for both of these projects, both the parking that is being delivered is less than 1 space per unit, and where Senate Bill 4 requires a minimum 1 space per unit. So that's where we may not have used Senate Bill 4 if it came down to parking. But I also wanted to share a tip with you guys, and that is the passage of AB 1851 in 2020. This is another tool that really came before Senate Bill 4. And AB 1851 reduces the number of required parking spaces on site for religious uses. So what it says is, if you have an existing religious use, that you're allowed to reduce the parking down to 50% in order to accommodate your affordable housing project. Okay, so that's something where moving forward, I can still utilize SB4 in combination with AB 1851 to arrive at my parking, right? That was 0.7 spaces per unit for both Placentia and Buena Park. So that's a little tip for some of the developers that are out there. Next slide. Okay, and this is the last one. I wanted to end by saying, I believe Senate Bill 4 is an important tool to advance the production of affordable housing in Orange County and throughout the state of California. Now, not every site's going to qualify for Senate Bill 4, as Madi explained, right? What the qualifications and criteria are. And we as a developer are not necessarily going to use Senate Bill 4 on every church project. For example, it depends on the financing strategy, because Senate Bill 4 triggers state prevailing wages, which significantly increases the total development costs. So if my capital stack doesn't already have a source that triggers prevailing wages, then I'm going to think twice about using Senate Bill 4. So for Placentia, for example, we already had sources in our capital stack, primarily funding from the state as well as vouchers, over 21 vouchers. So we were already paying state as well as federal prevailing wages. So with Placentia, I probably would have moved forward using Senate Bill 4. Now, Buena Park, on the other hand, Buena Park, we were not utilizing any sources that that required prevailing wages. And so I would have probably not used Senate Bill 4 on the Buena Park project, because that would have added significant cost to an already difficult and challenging project to finance. So just, you know, from a developer's point of view, is there, while Senate Bill 4, I think, provides a tool for us, you want to weigh the benefits and the consequences, right, of using that tool. And so it may not be a fit for every project, but I certainly think it's an important tool to advance affordable housing. So that ends, yes, that ends my presentation. Happy to answer any questions that you might have. And again, happy to give a tour of these projects. Placentia is about done. We're going to be having our grand opening in early 2024. So I'd love for you to join us and give you a tour of that project.
Awesome. Thank you so much. There's a couple of questions in the chat that I will go ahead and put forward. So this person says, under SB4, the church has to provide at least one parking space per unit. Does it mean it might be beneficial to look at other ways to build parking, because parking can be pricey when the church has a small site in an urban setting?
Yeah, well, so one of the tips, I would look at it a couple ways, is parking can be, especially in an urban setting where you don't have space, right? We were able, for the 2 case studies I showed here, is to provide surface parking. But if you're forced to go into a podium or type of structured parking, 1 space per unit can be quite expensive. And so that's where I would utilize or look at using AB 1851 to see if that tool could assist me in reducing below a 1 space per unit. Also, typically in urban locations, you are going to be close to transit. So you also want to see if you qualify for the exemptions on parking, that if you're in close proximity within a half mile to a high quality transit station, then no parking is required. And so it's looking at other tools that are still available out there in your toolbox that could still help you in combination with Senate Bill 4.
Awesome. And then just
I
a
see
note.
nodding, yeah, because I want to open this up to you, Mari, if you have any other, any.
Only adding that also, if it's, within 1 block of car share, you also don't need to have that parking. So you need to look for these different opportunities to reduce the parking, below, if you need that waiver below, to get it below 1.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I see Leon has his hand up. Leon, would you like to unmute and go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. This has been really helpful. A lot of information. We're just kind of starting to look into the implications of SB4. I'm with Los Angeles County. And I wanted to ask if you could speak to the relationship between the church and the housing operator. And specifically, the one thing I'm not hearing is any guardrails in place to prevent housing discrimination, like, for example, people of different faiths or no faith, or members of the LGBTQ+ community. If you could speak to that, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. So for National Core, we're an owner operator. So we also will provide that. We manage all of our apartment home communities, even our church partnership communities. And so these are still projects that are heavily regulated, right? So we still have to abide by fair housing law, and the various funding sources still require an open process. So we still go through our regular lease up process. Individuals would qualify like you would at any affordable housing project, right? And and there's different caveats depending on the various funding sources, but you do not have to be a church member or religious to live in these communities. In fact, we market These, as we would any of our affordable housing communities, we create a wait list and we conduct a lottery to the various applicants to get awarded an apartment home community. So we can't give preference. We're not giving preference to the church members. Does that answer
Great,
your
thank
question? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then
And I
we
will-
had a couple of questions earlier, but I think this one lends itself to that too. There was a question to talk about, could you give like a profile of a church that would be a good candidate? And I think they were referring to like the age of the congregation, cash flow issues of the congregation, and then kind of segues onto that is this other question about who owns the buildings and how do they work out the ground lease. I mean, I think you were saying, Alexa, every project is kind of a different, could potentially look differently, but maybe you can speak to
Yes.
that.
Sure. So I'll start with that, with the ground lease question. Is I would say majority of our church partnership projects are long-term ground leases. Just like within city government, there is, a governmental structure to a church, right? And so in this case of our Episcopal church partnerships, the LA Diocese owns the land and they want to continue to own the land. And so we entered into a long-term ground lease with them to lease the land for, in both of these cases, it's a minimum 99 years. You need to do a minimum 65 years for TCAC purposes, but if it's HCD sources that you're using, it's 99. Anyways, so the church continues to own the land, and we, it's the limited partnership that we as a developer that owns the buildings, right? And so that's the way that structure works. But we do have a few cases in that slide where I showed you a number of our other church partnerships. For example, we have our Legacy Square development in Santa Ana, as well as our project in Riverside, where that was excess land that we were able to acquire. And then it was just like you would any private sellers. We acquired the land through a purchase and sale agreement, and now we own the land as well as the buildings. In terms of what would make an ideal site, what we have seen, I'd say primarily with our church partnerships, it's a win-win in that many of these churches are struggling with membership, right? With their congregational numbers. They have an aging congregation and it's diminishing. And so their challenge as a congregation is maintaining their property and their buildings, and they don't have the revenue, right, coming in. And so what we're able to offer them is a revenue source, right? So through ground lease payments, they're receiving annual rent. And that's a consistent revenue source that, is tied, does have an annual or, an increased based in there. And so it's for the length of the lease that they're going to continue to receive payments. And, really every church property is different. What we'll do is we'll go out and give an honest assessment, look at the property itself. In some cases, even if you don't have vacant land, there may be buildings that the church says, hey, we don't utilize these buildings. You could demolish those to create more developable area for the affordable housing. And then we have others where you're infilling on a parking lot. It really depends on the situation on the site. Every site's different. I'd say we typically need at least a half acre, right, to get to that scale of affordable units that can be financed and built. Yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, I think that got it, what Daniel was asking for. So the last question is, Betsy is asking to confirm that SB4 requires a nonprofit housing developer. Is that?
Yes.
We see nodding from Maya and Alexa. Awesome. Okay,
and affordable housing director, and using the technical term affordable, correct?
Yes, I think he said it was 20% could be moderate at 100% AMI, and the rest had to be 80% or below AMI, area median income,
Yes.
which
Okay,
for
thank you.
Orange County this year is
I know.
north of $100,000 for a family of
Yes.
4. So you can
Right.
be a dual income young professional household and still be considered low income, which boggles the mind, but that's why we
Yes.
do what we do, to try to build more
Right.
affordable housing.
Okay, thank you.
And then, so I want to just respect everybody's time, but I just wanted to give Monty a chance. I don't know if you were able to find the high fire information.
Yes, the two points in the, so FE4 does not apply in very high fire severity zones. So that still doesn't apply. We were trying to change that towards the end to sort of like limit it to broaden it to some zones, but currently FE4 does not apply to very high fire severity zones. Second thing that one of my colleagues here actually in the audience, Doris Gressley with the Carpenters, brought up was that SB4 labor standards don't apply to projects smaller than 10 units. So that is potential for folks looking to do very small projects. You might have that. So sorry, Linda, could you please repeat? So SB4 is not allowed in specifically very high fire severity zones. So if it's high or medium would be fine, but if it's a very high fire severity zone, SB4 would not be applicable.
And Monty, is the WUI synonymous with high fire? Is that the same thing, or that's not the same thing?
I'm not
The
familiar
wildland
with...
urban interface.
Oh no, so that's a different mapping. That the very high priority severity zones are maps that put out by the California Department of Wildfire and Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. They put out maps that show. I know somebody else asked, is there, like, there's all these restrictions, is there a map that shows where this is applicable? I wish that was the case, and maybe that's something we should really lobby HCD to do, because there is all these bills, AB 2011, FP4, FP43, each of them have different applicabilities.
Yeah.
And that is unfortunate. It is often left to the locality. So I know City of Los Angeles every so often publishes maps. I don't know if other cities in Orange County are doing that, and I imagine they're probably not, but Alexa can probably speak to it a little bit more.
Yeah, I want to say, I think the Turner Center too is like, they had released a white paper on SB4 before SB4 passed, but really saying, hey, SB4, this is the potential that it could have in increasing the supply of housing. And I think now that we know, right, the provisions that came with SB4, it's like taking a second look and saying, okay, let's remap this and look at the available, at the land that would qualify under SB4.
Exactly. David, go ahead.
Thank you. First, this is a wonderful seminar, and I must. I lost my headphones. I must apologize because believe that you may have covered this in the beginning, but am I understanding it correctly? The SB4 helps with the density, even if it's zoned a low density aspect. We have a project that's zoned R1, that's church-owned land, and in the city, that's 8.7 units per acre. So it's forcing us to go through a zoning change to do which would obviously go through the zone change. So what is, how is this something to talk about a little bit more offline, or is this, you still have time to address that?
Yeah, I'm happy because hi David, good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
And because that was the instance with the case studies I showed you in Buena Park and Placentia. They are both zoned R1. And so now that SB4 is in place, you do not have to go through a zone change, right? Okay. You are allowed by right to build up to 30 dwelling units per acre on that site.
And that's not, and
by right
before, so by right, and then does density, the bonus density laws go on top of that?
Correct. Yeah.
Well, it's not my project in my office. I'm just aware of the project, so I don't know the nuances. I know it is under an acre, and I know we are getting a lot of pushback on parking, the zoning change, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So up to 30 units per acre by right.
Yeah.
Without a zone change.
Correct.
I'm sure my associates and bosses will be happy about that. So,
Yes.
I think that's
Yeah.
the exact type of project that this allows.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, and and I want to say, and it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to build at 30 dwelling units per acre, right? But this bill permits you to, right? It allows you to build by right at that density. What you choose to do and how you end up building it is really up to you and as a developer and with your partners or neighbors or whatnot. But yeah.
Well, I mean, as I joke with all the associates that know me as having a really bad sense of humor, we all want to build the 45-story high rise that has 1 unit per floor, just so that we can get those 45 units in place on that 5,000 square foot lot. So absolutely.
Right.
Okay, we are going to edit that comment out because otherwise we're just going to scare people
It's a joke.
away.
Yeah.
It's a joke.
Yeah.
It's a joke.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I'm being recorded. So
Right. So I just because I can add my own commentary. I think one of the most interesting things that I've seen come out of these most recent laws of SB 6, AB 2011, and now SB 4, where they basically have made it, the legislature has basically given us permission to build on any land that as an already residential can now accommodate residential, as long as it's not an environmental hazard. Commercial land, church land, college land, and Alexa, to your point, it may not be that those laws become the tool that is used, but because that option is there, suddenly cities are more willing to negotiate the density of the project. So maybe it doesn't use the full density that's possible under SB4, but maybe you get a little more than you would have otherwise because you do have this alternative. And
Right.
whereas I think the benefit of new housing is housing for our community, housing for families, housing for our neighbors. The things that come when you have more population, you can have nice things. I think people are always a good thing, but I know not everyone sees it that way, but so it helps us get there. So, and I'm grateful for the foresight from the legislature to give us more tools in the toolbox. So, we're at 1:10. I think we're going to wrap because I want to respect everyone's time. And just want to thank Alexa again and Mati for being willing to do this webinar. We really want to promote this as a tool and get the word out about the opportunity that SB4 brings. So again, really grateful to Mati and Intercity Law Center for sponsoring this bill, to Senator Scott Wiener for carrying this bill, to all the other bill sponsors, the Carpenters Union, all my YIMBY friends and relations who helped get it over the finish line, and especially to Abram Diaz was at NPH, now has since moved on to work for one of the legislators, but would be remiss if we didn't plug him as the driving force behind this and keeping us all shepherded together to support it across the finish line. So thanks to all of them, and thanks to you, Alexa, and National Corps, and Mati, and Intercity Law Center for your time today. And we will make the slides available to everyone who registered. We've had questions about contact information. Could we potentially put that contact information in that email that we send as a follow-up?
Yes. Yeah. I thought I left my email. So yes,
Oh.
please. If anybody has follow-up questions or wants to talk, do not hesitate.
There we go.
Yeah.
Here we go. On the end. Perfect. awashburn@nationalcorps.org. And I know they would love to hear from you because they are in the business of building more housing. And so with that, we'll leave it there and hope everybody has a great rest of your week.
Great. Thank you.